Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome along to this week's Leading Light, CMI's 75th anniversary series of interviews with great leaders from across the CMI community. I'm Anthony Painter, the Director of Policy at CMI, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Heather Melville OBE, who's partner at Ridgeway Partners and previously with PriceWaterhouseCoopers, having enjoyed a highly successful career mainly in financial services. Heather's also a CMI Board member and Chair of CMI Women. Welcome, Heather.
Welcome.
Really great to see you this afternoon. It is just afternoon, just a couple of minutes in. So look, I mean, let's start by taking a step back. You've had a career in management and leadership in a number of different settings. Quite a lot of has changed. Quite a lot has evolved. What do you see, in your career thus far, what do you see have been the major changes that you've observed in the nature of management and leadership? And what do you think were some of the critical turning points?
Well, first things for us to be aware of is it's evolving all the time, okay? Yeah. 2 years ago, leaders in this country and around the world didn't think they would have been faced with a massive pandemic they were faced with. So one of the things I would say as a leader in today's world is be prepared for change at any moment, any time. So it's about being adaptable and flexible and being able to take your leadership skills to a place you've never taken it before. Yeah. But also part of that is making sure you bring the people you work with alongside, because they're all going through various different challenges at the same time. And you need to be able to embrace that and help them while still leading your business successfully.
That's really interesting, and it's that point around being emotionally engaged with your team and your organisation has never been more critical, has it? I mean, it was always been important, of course it has, but the emphasis on it, I think, has been even more acute, particularly in the sort of pandemic. I mean, what we're finding at CMI is a lot of managers reporting an improvement in their organizational productivity over the past 2 or 3 years. But actually alongside that, more difficulty in forming those sort of social bonds and relationships, and maybe with some well-being issues that their team is facing. So this is an entirely new configuration of challenge, isn't it?
Well, I think what's quite interesting, and I've certainly noticed that myself, is we've spent so much time speaking to these screens. So all we do is see people's heads and shoulders. Actually, many people have started new careers, new jobs, working with new teams. They don't know how tall they are. They don't know how wide they are. They just see them in a screen. And I know one of the things that was quite emotional for me is when I'd see people for the first time, and all of a sudden they're really tall, and the first thing they wanted to do is hug me. But we wouldn't have done that ordinarily. I just think because for 2 years, we've been away from the reality of being around people. And one of the things that we have all learned, certainly during this pandemic, is the ability to have the human connection, be in the room, look people in the eye, get that genuine feeling that they care about you. But also, if you're in a business meeting, you can tell by people's behaviors if they're really connecting to what you're saying or not. On the screen, actually, you don't know. You really don't know. And for those that like to switch their camera off in between, that's even worse, because you don't know if they're waiting to accept an Amazon package or they've literally just come off because they're bored. So I think one of the things that we have also learned around this whole pandemic and really engaging with people is the ability to tune into people. When you've got a screen of 10 or 12 people on that screen, being able as a leader to be able to see if there is one person that's withdrawn or not part of the conversation, it becomes a skill. Ordinarily, you wouldn't really need to do that because they'd be in the room with you. And so I think our style of leadership that we have now really started to enjoy is going to be the way that we lead going forward in the future.
Yeah. And of course, that starts to blur the lines between working life and home life or private life in some respect, inevitably, because we've all had to bring more of ourselves to work over the last couple of years, and maybe weren't bringing enough of ourselves to work previously. You know, the challenges that we were facing, whether it's childcare or an illness in the family, or there's something else that's going on in our lives, something else we have to devote our attention to, something about who we are that we want to be, you know, have a sort of organizational context to as well. You know, increasingly, we've had to bring more of ourselves into our working life, it seems to me, and that's created new pressures. But it's also created an opportunity, if you like, to feel that sense of team bond and commitment to an even deeper extent. Do you think that's about right?
Well, what I think I've certainly experienced it is that employers that really care about their employees get better loyalty and payback. Yeah. And I think where we're seeing that is that whole thing where people have been working from home. And this isn't just a women's thing. Let me be clear about this. This is men as well. The ability for a parent to take their child to school, bring them back, collect them in the evening as part of their working day, that's priceless. For many people who have not had opportunity, they've either had nannies or parents looking after their children, they've not been able to do that. You know, and so for me, that builds in a sense of loyalty. I've worked with people who have said to me, look, between 4 and 6, I'm going to be busy cooking dinner, but I can be back online at 7 to finish off what I was doing with you. And I think that's amazing, okay? Because that flexibility that's in place has taken people to a different place. I think there's a value part of that. The flip side of perhaps us working remotely all the time means that we're not connecting with people, and the human nature is that we connect with you at the water cooler, at the coffee bar, at the restaurant. How was your day? Anyone who knows me know I like nice shoes. I always say they're nice shoes or a nice tie, but those general things that we weren't able to do, you know, that's changed how our mindset is, and that's really important. When you're in a meeting, the amount of times, even though it's 2 years, we've still had people be talking and forgetting they're on mute, right?
Yes.
And having to remind them, you're on mute, message them. That's happened to me as well, even though I've tried to avoid it happening. But also the thing that I've liked about it is the ability we're all very private people. We keep our private lives exceptionally private, but yet still it's a part of bringing a part of who you are to work. So actually I'm on a call and my cat decides to walk across my keyboard, and he always waits until I'm on a call, right?
Of course.
But he just knows I'm going to get her attention. But what that then does is that people on the call will say to me, oh, Heather, I didn't know you had a cat. We have a completely different conversation. They get to find out something about me that they probably wouldn't have found out before, and vice versa. I've been on calls with quite senior people, and they said, I'm really sorry, but my daughter, I said, bring them in. Bring them onto the call to say hello. And so what happens is that we've slightly shifted to a more open way of working with people. So when we actually do go back into the workplace, you're actually having a conversation with somebody. And I think there's an appreciation for the time that we have had away from human beings, which, you know, I have to say is a really key part of who we are as elements. We've been brought up in this world for so many years that we come into work, we have meetings, we ask the questions, we socialize, we go to lunch. All of that was taken away from us at the drop of a hat. Yeah. And so we had to position ourselves in a different way. I've learned the art of having a really nice shawl or a nice jewelry there, but I can quickly pop on in between when I'm doing a call or something. We've learned how to do it. The only thing I would say that as leaders we have to be careful of is that we seem to have assumed that by doing all of our calls virtually, we've got more hours in the day. Yes. So we don't allow people time to breathe, to go to the loo. The amount of times I've said to people, hold on one sec, can you just take 15 minutes off? So I like to have 45 minutes for a meeting. So I've got 15 minutes to either recap or go to the bathroom. Otherwise, you could be on a call from 9 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night, and you have not moved from your desk.
Yes.
And the other side of that is that's unhealthy as well.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So we've had to learn how to embrace the change that we've just been through, but do it in such a way. And also when we're leading meetings with senior people, be confident enough to say, I want to have a break in between, up front. If the agenda doesn't show it, to be able to say, I think it's important that we have a 5 or 10 minute break.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I that was certainly the experience of the first lockdown, I think, for a lot of people, myself included, actually, that I suddenly found myself in a very short space of time clicking into that mode of, logging on 8:30, whatever, and then, logging off 6:30. And that was your day. You didn't quite know what you'd done in a day. All you knew, you'd been sat in front of a screen. The other thing that I found, I don't know whether you found this Heather, is the thing that's really suffered over the last couple of years is the ability to generate a sense of trust. And we've had to work much harder at that. I remember when, at the beginning, it was all about, you need to be in a room together to be creative and so on. That might be true to a certain extent, but I think online can replicate a lot of that. But the thing that it doesn't replicate and really struggles to replicate is that trust. And that trust doesn't come from just working together on a project, in a team. It comes from those water cooler conversations. It comes from understanding what's going on in someone's life, or what football team they support, or what they're interested in, and just being able to sort of pass them in the corridor and get a sense of what's going on with them, and they ask you about what's going on with you. And it's that sort of deeper human connection which then emphasizes the importance of trust in any organization, inclusive trust, but trust nonetheless.
Yeah, I'd agree with you, because the other thing that working remotely has done is the ability for us to do this private chat that takes place whilst you're on a call. You can't tell what they're saying, but someone's bashing away, and you can tell by the eyes whether they've received a meeting where someone doesn't agree with what you've said. And I think, excuse me,
that's okay.
I think that in itself sometimes is where you lose that element of trust. So I almost feel that we have to say to people, the chat facility is there for you to put a note into the overall group that you're presenting to.
Yeah.
For you to have personal conversations with other people.
Yeah. Now, taking a step back from all of this, it can emphasize there's ever greater layers and loading on managers and the capabilities and skills they're expected to have. I don't want to caricature too much, but of course, traditionally management and leadership is very much around managing performance and metrics and efficiency, organizational development in a more sort of technical, structural sense, obviously innovation and product development and so on. Of course, all of that's central. But over the past decades, managers rightly have been expected to develop not just this emotional capability, but an understanding about what is equitable and fair and equal and inclusive, and increasingly a sense of sort of values and ethics, that there is a purpose to what we're doing. We're not just here for the balance sheet. The balance sheet, of course, is important for any organization because it's what enables it to keep on going and resourcing what it wants to do. But increasingly, it's about the wider purpose. Do you, I mean, it's easy to see this sort of this arc of change over day. Is that something you've observed? Do you think that's a sort of fair description about how management and leadership have evolved?
Well, I think the last 2 years, once again, has actually showed us that, right? Because whereas before we would have really cringed at the idea of somebody working from home for the whole week.
Yes.
And they've had to do it for 2 years. There's been an element of trust that's had to be brought into that. There's also had an element of respect that's had to come into that as well. Because for me, it's really been about being authentic as a leader. And I think that's really been quite key. We've had people say, look, I'm really not coping very well with this at the moment.
Yeah.
And being able to pick that up and things like, I've seen this with my own eyes, where particularly a lot of the really young people who live in rented accommodation, in the heart of the city, they're not really in their shared accommodation very long, right? They come home, they shower and they go to bed, they're up the next day, they've gone out, the weekends they're busy. All of a sudden they're in this room 24 hours.
Tough.
Some of them haven't been able to do the screen, to privatise off the room that they sleep in. We've seen people's beds, we've seen people's dressing tables.
Yes.
People also haven't had all the correct equipment, because we naturally assume when we're at work, our organisation takes care of us. They make sure that our seating is at the right level, we've got the right desks, we've got the right aircon, and all of that situation. And when we're working from home, we don't have that. Yes. And so there is an element of looking after people's health. I think we both mentioned at the very beginning, being sat down from 9 o'clock in the morning, through till sort of 4 or 5 o'clock, sometimes not even stopping to go to lunch, because when we're engrossed, we're engrossed. And I think what that has done, it's done two things. It's shown to all employee organisations that their employees can be trusted with doing the work wherever they are. You don't have to be in an office, but wherever you are, you can be empowered to do that. The other side of that, what employers are saying is, I trust you to do that. And now what I want to do is make that flexible, so make it work as much as it can for you. And I think that's why so many organisations have said, actually, we're going to support this new way of working, this innovative way of working, the hybrid way, which means you can be at home 2 days a week or 3 days a week. It doesn't matter where you are, because we've learned to work that way. And so I think for me, I said at the very beginning, we have to change the way we think to be more future thinking. And that's what we've all been forced in that way. And as a leader, you imagine doing someone's end of year review on a screen. Let's say you were crazy 3 years ago, or actually you were doing an interview.
Yes.
I was interviewed for my new role over Zoom, telephone call.
Yes.
I started on the 4th of January, a new job, having physically not met a lot of my colleagues, with my laptop delivered to me, my iPhone, everything, I set up before, and I was feeling quite proud of myself. Whereas once upon a time, I would have thought, I can't do this. Who am I going to get to help me? We've trained ourselves in a very different way. So I think this whole pandemic has brought some really good things to the table for us, but it's also given us things to think about. So if we go back to the whole piece about how do you make people feel included?
Yeah.
How do you make, we know that during the pandemic, predominantly women have impacted quite a lot, because they are the carers of their families, including, even if they haven't got children, but they might be looking after parents, or, or a brother or sister that's got a disability. Those people have struggled quite a lot as well.
They have.
Because being in front of a screen 24/7, working in a way that you've never worked, is very hard. And the other thing I would say is people's mental health.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden you've moved from just a technical professional leader to somebody who now needs to understand the mental health of the people you work with. That means being observant as a leader.
Yes.
Being able to understand the behaviours of somebody. If you can see someone's not engaging, there's a way that you don't pry, but there's a way that you show that you care. You can just send them a note or pick up the phone and say, look, I noticed you were really quiet. Is everything okay with you? There are many people who lost loved ones during that period of us being away from the office. Now, typically, if that had happened, you may have gone into work and you may have said that, I've lost my aunt, my sister, my mum, or whatever. And then you'd have got compassion from your colleagues that you worked with. You'd have been able to see family members. All of that was removed with us in one go. Yeah. So actually, and for those people who are very private individuals, and there are a lot, particularly I'd say from a lot of ethnically diverse backgrounds, where people don't necessarily come to work and tell you how they're feeling just because they never have done.
Yeah.
Dealing with bereavement during that time has been pretty hard.
Yes.
So we've had to, as leaders, we need to train ourselves to be able to show that we care without being overtly nosy, should we say, but a genuine, authentic, I really care about this person, and it could be a range of different things. Even if someone's struggling with their workload, I've been on calls with people and, they're busy. Remember, the government said we had to homeschool.
Yes.
The children couldn't go to school. People who had one child, that's one thing. People who had 4 children or 3 children.
It's quite literally a homeschool.
Absolutely. you know, and remember, homeschooling was about feeding them at the same time, trying to keep them going at the same time, and, you know, all of those things. They're learned skills that we've all had to observe. You know, I've been in calls where I've said to people, now listen, I'm not expecting you to be on that call today because I know you're homeschooling. So if you need to set up with me later on, please just give me a call when it works for you, and I can update you on the call. Things like that are what good leaders need to have done during this time.
They also need to be aware of their own needs, don't they? And I've you know, during this time, we talked about mental health and well-being and pressures, and having to simultaneously manage your home and work life, and feeling like, let's be honest, you're failing in both, because you can't quite devote enough attention to say your family, but you can't quite devote enough sort of concentrated time to work, because it's just impossible. And I've seen some incredibly strong and resilient managers over the last couple of years not be aware of the pressures they were facing, and actually almost get to a point of no return as a result of it. And that's been hard to see. And I think managers' health and well-being, their mental health and well-being, has to be part of the conversation as well. And it also has to be part of the organizational conversation as well. I mean, managers, you know, they've got skills, they've got experience, but they're not superhuman, and they're not beyond the same pressures that everybody faces. And I think a bit of collective awareness around that would be helpful for everyone, I feel.
I think where I've seen that been really good, in my previous employer, they would have events in the afternoon, which were like, you know, get people doing things together, because I think that's really important, that energy level, but also getting people to talk to each other and communicate that wasn't necessarily work related. That half hour, we used to do something like the coffee breaks.
Yes.
And that was really good, because you would talk to somebody you worked with in a different part of the business that ordinarily you would never get the time to speak to them. And actually, I think that was quite important, because, you know, there are people who are going through divorces, there are people who've gone through loss, there are people who live on their own, and actually their work environment is a very important part of their existence.
Yes.
And when you can't actually connect with people in a natural way, and you haven't got any family at home, you know, that in itself is an awful pressure on someone's whole mental health. And I think if ever there was a time that leaders should be talking about mental health, it's now.
Yes, including their own as well.
Absolutely. And I think when leaders talk about their own mental health issues or the challenges that they've gone through, immediately that allows other people to own it up. And that's why I talked about authenticity at the very beginning.
Yes.
So, you know, I went through a huge amount of losses during 2020, 2021. Within 6 months, five close people I'd lost, as well as people who in my team had lost their close people. And I remember when one of our colleagues very sadly lost her husband in a very tragic situation. And all of the leaders, we all got onto a call. And I tell you, I'd never expected to see it, but there was not one dry eye on that call while we were deciding how we needed to help our team get through the loss they'd all gone through. Because he was not only the partner of somebody that worked in our organisation, but he was also a colleague, and a very loved colleague of many people who'd been there. Now, when that happens, no one was prepared for that, and especially during the pandemic. And you have a whole group of what we call really dynamic leaders who are used to being very in your face, let's get this done. And all of a sudden, they're all there drying their eyes because they're emotionally shocked by what they have just learned. That was really quite powerful for the teams, for them to see that firsthand, because all of a sudden they saw their leaders as real people that really cared.
Yes.
You know, and I found myself unable to cry about my own losses because I just wouldn't give myself permission to do that, but actually being in tears about the losses of somebody in our team, because that felt like it was a natural thing. And I remember somebody saying to me, Heather, why can you not cry with what's happened in your own family, but you've allowed yourself to cry with us? We've seen something quite powerful. And I really couldn't answer that question apart from the fact that I was in that moment. And that resilience, I think I went back and I said, we all deal with grief and different things were going in a different way. And I guess my final point is, if you think about it, prior to the last 2 years, if anyone had lost their family members or anything had happened, the first thing you'd probably know is if they asked to take some special leave.
Yes.
You would never see them in that vulnerable place.
No.
They'd be off for a little while, then they'd come back.
Yes.
And then back again. Now,
Yes.
with as leaders, we've had to deal with them working through all that emotional loss they've gone through, plus still managing the workload and making sure that as leaders, we can share that workload amongst the rest of our team to give those individuals that personal time to deal with what they're dealing with. But also, I think as a leader, us being able to identify when somebody who's normally quite strong suddenly withdraws but isn't telling you why.
Yes.
We've got a duty of care to ask them what's happening for them. Can we help in any way whatsoever? Yes. And I think, you know, that in itself is quite important. And I'll probably just mention this because I think it's really quite an important point. We go through this end of year performance cycle every year, and we've all been through it during it. So people get really stressed about it. And one of the things that my last employer did was they delayed that financial performance when we all had to do our forms. They delayed it by a couple of months to give people that time to regroup. It's very important that we did it because that's linked to how people get paid. But I think that in itself was just a really thoughtful act, a decision that was made so that people were not just focusing, I've got to do, it's another pressure point on top of them whilst we're all in this big boiling pot of pressure. And at the same time, we've still got to lead our teams and take care of homeschooling at home and everything else that came with this period of time that we've been through. So one of the things I would like to say is that I believe that people have learned a lot of skills during this time. Resilience is probably the biggest one of all of them. And I'm hoping that many leaders have learned the ability to be authentic and vulnerable with their teams, because that breeds a very different kind of culture that actually many organizations are trying to create. They want a culture where people feel they can bring the best of who they are into work every day. That means if you've got a headache, I can say I've got a headache.
Yes.
You know, if you're not feeling at your best today, you've had a loss or something, you can say it because actually your boss has said it. Your boss is human. Yes. Right? And I think all of those things are important.
See, what you're describing is the sort of, you know, the barriers between us coming down. It's kind of interesting because at one point we're talking about how difficult it is to establish social trust, but equally alongside that, I think you're exactly right that actually people have brought more of themselves into the situation. They've allowed themselves to be more vulnerable. To a greater extent, they have been watching out for others, and you know that speaks to our humanity in the workplace. My question though is, you know, increasingly we're hearing a bit of a sort of a drumbeat of trying to, you know, get back to life as normal, living with COVID, going back to how it was before. You know, some government ministers are saying to, you know, civil servants get back in the office. Elements of the city are saying the same. I saw a really ugly phrase on Twitter yesterday. Someone was talking about white collar entitlement, and they're referring to the ability to work from home and hybrid. I just think, you know, it's all becoming very politicized, and you know, it's becoming quite divisive. A lot of this. And do you think there is a risk that actually a lot of leaders and managers will instead of learning from the last 2 years and developing and evolving and capturing what has been good and rich and authentic and meaningful, that actually they try just to yank us back to where we were a couple of years ago, almost if the pandemic never happened and we haven't been through this whole experience?
Well, I think one thing we have to realise, this pandemic just didn't include us in our organisations. It didn't just include us in this country. It was a worldwide pandemic.
Yes.
So everybody was focusing on it. Now, I personally felt that when I couldn't go to the office, I felt like part of me was cut off.
Yes.
But actually, what I learned to do was appreciate a time when I could go back into the office. Do I want to go back into the office 5 days a week? Probably not, because I've worked out that I can be very productive when I've got a piece of work to do. My head's down and I've got it done. And also I can restrict the people that come to my desk that say, hi, Heather, do you want a coffee or do you want to chat? Because I need to get my head down. But the other side of that is it's thinking about that creativity time when you've got with other people can be quite powerful. That conversation could be quite powerful. And I remember when going back to the first time when it was opened up before we were locked down again, because it's happened quite a few times, but just going into the local shops in the vicinity of where I worked and being able to ask those people how they fared, see that some of those businesses closed down, right? You then start to realize the knock-on effect of the whole pandemic. Yes, there are people who are the doctors and nurses and some of those skills that are needed to keep the country going and keep organisations were going all the time. So in my last organisation, we didn't close down our buildings. We kept it open if people wanted to come into the office for mental health issues, if they felt they needed to come out. And we had quite a young population of people that wanted to come into the office. But also one thing that I was really, really quite proud of is that we did not lay off any of our ancillary staff, our facility staff. We had them in the office, keeping the office going so that we could come back into a really nicely refurbished office. They did things around the catering to keep us engaged so that everybody kept their jobs. And I think that meant a lot to individuals. When I witnessed some of my colleagues coming in for the first time and seeing people that they hadn't seen for, 18 months or 6 months, which was unheard of, that in itself was quite special. And we can't lose that.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. We can't leave that. And what I do worry about, and this is why CMI is just so important at this stage, is we need to remember the role of a leader and the role of a manager. And we need to keep investing in ourselves as leaders, and organisations need to keep investing in their roles as developing people as leaders, because you naturally promote somebody because they're good at something, but they haven't always naturally got those skills that I've talked about at the very beginning that are important. And we need to nurture those skills, because we're never going to go back to what it was 2 years ago, because the experience that we've had over that period of time has changed us all in some way or some shape or form. If it's not through losing people, it's been through losing a loved one, it's been through, being promoted during a time. A whole range of different life experiences have happened to every single individual, whether it's been you personally or it's been colleagues that you've worked with or friends that you've had in the workplace. So actually, because we've all experienced something different, we've got to bring that difference into where we are now. Yes. And for me, that is really about thinking about, okay, how do I create a more equitable and diverse organisation with diverse ways of thinking, with authentic thought leadership, engaging my employees, making them feel listened to, showing them that actually we care about things that happen in our own community. I just mentioned about all the businesses that were, being lost as a result of this. And actually, how do we pick up the pieces? And you'll see many of the young people, particularly, their way has been, I want to do something. I want to give something back. Yes. Because we lost so much over the last 2 years. Giving something back is always about giving something extra of yourself.
Yes.
But giving something extra of yourself is an additional quality that helps you as a leader.
Yeah.
The ability to listen, hear, be reactive to what you've heard, show that you care, and be resilient are skills that they're life skills.
And those life skills, and you're entirely right about the need to deliberately develop and cultivate those skills and capabilities. Of course, what CMI does is enable that to happen in a series of different settings and different contexts and different challenges. And I think it's probably worth us just sort of touching for a minute or two on many of the different types of settings that we've seen over the past couple of years. The challenges faced by an NHS manager are very different to a manager in professional services, or the manager of a construction company, or a retail or a distribution company, and so on. And it's important that we can reflect on the diversity of employee experience, but management and leadership experience as well, because obviously, in the height of pandemic, for example, if you're managing a ward in an acute trust, there was very little, if any, time to stand back and reflect. But now might be the moment that well, maybe not quite yet, let's be honest. In a few months down the line, all being well, there might be a moment to reflect again and see how management and leadership can work in a very different type of context.
Well, for me, I think that reflection, that period of reflection, helps us to become more aligned with who we are as individuals.
Yeah.
Because you have to acknowledge the past to allow the future to create the change you want.
Yes.
And so you can't pretend it hasn't happened.
Yes.
I can imagine school children talking about this for all of their careers, right? The way that they've done their exams, the way they've revised, or not, as the case may be, the accessibility of children to IT, whether they've had it or not, and be able to use it. That period of isolation, those children that are coming up that will go into the workplace, they're going to have a different set of challenges than people who are in the workplace now have had.
Yes.
So we've got to be prepared for that as leaders. We need to know how we bring them through with as much painless memories of what's happened over the last 2 years, and bring them to a place where they can say, actually, it's been tough, but I've learned a lot.
Yes. Yeah.
I think doing these talks with leaders, I think, is absolutely brilliant. It's critical because they hear from real leaders, real role models, real experiences. And actually, as a leader, a lot of the times that's what you need. You need to know you're not on your own. When you're managing, you need to know that above you recognizes that actually I'm really challenged at the moment with, I've got people in my team who their partners work for the NHS, or they're self-isolating because they're vulnerable. I've got to manage the business the best I can. I've got to manage the fact that person A or B may have had some sort of breakdown. They might have had a loss. So there's a whole new meaning to being an effective leader in management to what it was 2.5 years ago. 2.5 years ago, it might have been about delivering the numbers, delivering the marketing plan, the strategy, and all of that stuff. Now it's all of that plus all of the things I have just listed on top. So we then need to look back and think, what are the qualities of a good leader? Do we need to redefine them, and do we need to support them?
Very much so. And changing tack slightly, I'd like to sort of explore with you some of your own experiences. And you mentioned previously in the conversation around sort of diversity and inclusion. And I'd be interested to know, and you're obviously you're chair of CMI Women. I'd be interested to know from your perspective what strategies you've deployed that have enabled greater inclusivity on top of diversity, and what sort of strategies and practices you've observed that have made a real difference. Because obviously a lot of organizations are grappling with these issues quite rightly in the current environment.
So I think one of the key things really has been communication.
Yeah.
That simple little C that we all take for granted.
Yeah.
Is the one that has the biggest impact.
Yeah.
How we communicate with people, how we hear what they're saying, how we translate what they've said and bring that back to the business. So many leaders at the top have had to rely on great leaders, if they've got them in their organizations, communicating the message that they need to be heard by their employees. And during that time is, we do care about you.
Yes.
We care about your families. We value what you do because it's important to the success of our business. So we're going to make sure that we create an environment that's inclusive for you. The diversity piece for me, I always put to one side anybody that knows me, because that's just a tick box exercise, right? We can say we now look quite good on the screen because we've got a few black people on our screen. Tick. Yeah. We've got a few people who are women and a couple of people who said they're LGBT because they've got the LGBT lanyard around their neck. That's all we need to do. No. What we've got to work on, and that's why the inclusion agenda is so important to me, is creating an environment which feels inclusive. So the minute you walk through the door or you attach yourself to a Teams or whatever platform we use, you feel like you have a right to be in that room.
Yes.
That I think is something that organisations really need to work hard at. And by the way, their clients are expecting that of them.
Yes.
When they do those wonderful RFP documents and all those things that, to attract them to business, they say, tell us about how inclusive you really are. What are the things you've put in place? We would have had in the last 2 years, we would have had graduates who have never met their employees face to face.
Yes.
They've gone through a program, they've gone through being selected. And a big part of the graduate schemes is that you all get people together.
Yes.
Physically. That's not happened. Many people will be meeting people for the first time. They've been in a business. I know my niece qualified as a lawyer and she started a new job. And actually she was itching to get out and meet her new colleagues because all she did was see them on a screen. Yeah. And that first moment when she met them, she said it felt really strange, Aunt, and she had a mask on, but at least I was in the room with them. And so I really think that appreciation of the working environment and the working environment being connected to our values is even more significant now than it was before.
Yes. I like that notion of everybody should have a voice in the room that you articulated. Now, Heather, I'm going to take a question from someone who's been watching live, from Hayden, because it touches on this area quite directly. And Hayden asks, for many organisations, mandatory training for managers seems very old-fashioned and is focused on health, safety, and compliance. How do we start to shift to including important topics like equality, diversity, and inclusion, mental health awareness, etc., into what is seen as mandatory?
Brilliant question. Absolutely brilliant question. Because for me, that conversation that becomes part of the critical mass. That becomes part of the business conversation all the time. So leaders need to be having those conversations. They need to be driving that from the top, because guess what? It's expected. And that whole thing is employees speak with their voices. Right. Yeah. And when people do those surveys at the end of every year or whenever they do them, and they ask that question, how inclusive do you think our organisation is? When the answer comes back, we don't think it's very inclusive for whatever reason, we then need to ask our leaders, what are they doing to make that change in place? Yes. And so the first thing for me, and this is, I always say that the head of HR, the head of the D&I practice, and the business leader, I always think it's accountable for that, need to look at this, because this becomes the war around reputation. If people are leaving your organisation because they don't feel they're valued there, that rumour seems to get outside.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. If you're not attracting people into your organisation that look and feel different, people will notice it. Yes. Youngsters will make that decision, especially now. People are saying, how did you deal with people during the pandemic? And those organisations said, well, we expected them to come to work every day and whatever. They're not going to work there. They are not going to work there. So that means you have a huge war on talent.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so for organisations to become successful, they've really got to become successful by bringing together the values of their employees and those of their clients to create a better working culture that makes you more attractive as an organisation, one, to work for, but two, to do business with.
So what we seem to be saying on the training question is, yes, absolutely. It should be mandatory, because people need that awareness, that capability, that skill. But actually, this is not just, an area you have to cover off to make sure people have been through the training. It actually it's not even about, just about diversity and inclusion in and of itself. This is about the way you are as a business, what you hold to be dear, important, but also what will feed through into your success, however you choose to define that, whether it's purpose or profit or whatever it may be. It will feed through into your success as an organisation.
Do you know what I always think as well? And it's always a question I always put to people. Have a look at what your annual report says that you send out to all your shareholders, and then go back and see how it feels in your organisation. If those two do not mirror up together, then say something, speak up.
Yeah,
you won't be the only person that's speaking up, because the impression we put out to the world that we're an inclusive organisation, needs to be what our colleagues feel every day when they come to work. And most chief execs, and I say most because it does keep a lot of them awake, most chief execs are saying, how can I build a more inclusive organization? And to do that, they've got to work with their chief diversity officer. They've got to work in collaboration with the business, and they've got to work in collaboration with the HR to make that happen, because it's all about our people. If our people don't feel valued and don't feel cared about, it doesn't matter. For 2 years, they've not been able to go into a building. So you can have the most fanciest buildings with the most awesome reception, with the most wonderful words on your internet page. But actually, if none of it isn't the lived experience of what people walk into work every day and feel, that's going to have an impact on your reputation. And by the way, you see those RFPs that come in where they ask you, tell us about your green policy, or tell us about how it feels for your employees to come into work. What things are you putting in place to create a more inclusive place? How many women do you have in senior roles? How many people from ethnic diverse backgrounds do you employ in your organizations? Those questions are there for a reason, because people will make their decision as to whether or not they will do business with you as an organization based on the whole piece of how inclusive you are.
So what do you say to me if I come into your office and I sit down, chief executive of a medium-sized firm, I say, look, I've got stresses and strains. I'm trying to keep people in jobs. I've got to implement technology, and we've got our competitors breathing down our neck. I care about environmental stuff. I care about equity, diversity, all that stuff. I'm compliant with the law because you have to be, But I really can't divert my attention from my core business to this in a systematic way, because the business is going to suffer as a result. What do you say to me?
No excuse. This is their core business. Just like technology has become quite core. Do you remember maybe 12 or 15 years ago? Technology was struggling to be at the forefront of any board meeting because they thought it was something that happens over there. All of a sudden, it's absolutely key, fundamentally key to the success of how your business moves. Even those organizations that still like to be old-fashioned and do things paper-led, right? They've had to move to a very different way. So it's a shift. And leaders are leaders because they have the ability to shift their mindsets very quickly. And so that whole piece is being able to say to them how critical this is. You cannot run a successful business without great people.
Yeah.
Great people means looking after the talent you attract. And we know what groupthink's done. We've seen it in our own country in politics, when you've got everybody that thinks the same without a diversity of thought, doesn't lead to the best business decisions. So we need to take that back to our chief execs and say to them, actually, there's a better way of us doing this. How can we help you? And I think one of those key things for me is really making sure that that chief diversity officer or director of inclusion or whatever they're called is incorporated into the business marketing strategy part of any organization.
Yeah.
It's part of how we go out to market.
Yeah. Yeah. And therefore we've got to be true to our commitments and be authentic in that regard. Now, Edwin has come in with a question. I think he's agreeing with you furiously, and makes the point. Obviously, it's widely known that one of the main reasons people leave jobs is because of poor management and leadership. So he's asking, what are your thoughts on how we raise self-awareness of managers and leaders in relation to the impact that their behavior can have on their colleagues?
Well, it's really interesting, actually. And I agree with that, Edwin, because, you very hear people saying, I'm leaving an organization. What they are saying is, I can't stand the person I've worked for. They haven't treated me very well. Now, there's a couple of things here. Organizations that really care about this, make sure they do exit interviews. Right? They know where they've got an area where they've got a bad leader. And they do know a lot of the times. But it takes confidence and timing to deal with those bad leaders. If you have 3 or 4 people leaving the business area and constantly going, and they, or even if they won't say why they're going, you've got a problem there. And I really feel that in the day of change, what we need to see is companies investing in upskilling their leaders, because a lot of them haven't been trained. As I said at the very beginning, they've been successful in one area of their life, whether they've done a big project or they've done a big sales campaign, really good, and we've rewarded them by saying, I'm going to promote you. And actually promoting them, you give them a power, a nice title. For some people, that's all they need. But actually what you needed to do is prepare them. Your biggest value you've got are your people. Yet still, you're going to put them in front of a bad leader. That's going to have an impact on your business. So we do have an ability and a responsibility as employers and senior leaders to make sure we're providing the training that managers need. And this is where CMI can come in really handy. And actually, even if people's organizations aren't doing it, you have a whole community of leaders who would have been through something that you're going through at this moment in time as a possible manager or as a leader, or actually as an employee. Use the networks to say, I've got this situation. How do I deal with this? Sometimes people are not aware of their impact on others.
Yeah.
Right. And when they're stressed, that awareness becomes 10 times worse. They just don't notice it, and they get focused on, I'm just focused on the end game. And by the way, it doesn't matter if I look around me, no one's following me. The mindset of a successful leader are the fact that you see people prepared to follow them and bring ideas to them and be right behind and in support of them. So if a leader is saying, I can't get my team to do something, there is a problem there. And as a head of a business or a leader, we have a responsibility to help them with that. And I think, most organizations have something called Speak Up.
Yeah.
People don't use it as much as they should do because they keep thinking if they use it, they might get exposed and it might have repercussions. Actually, organizations invest in things like Speak Up because they need you to tell them what's going on.
Yeah. And managers themselves benefit from the feedback, right? And CMI has this phrase from accidental to conscious management or leadership, and that's part of the process. If people don't tell you as to why you're not taking them with them, or things you're missing, or ways in which you're excluding people that you're not aware of, actually you need to know, and you need to be open to knowing, and not be defensive about that. Now, all of this, is we've got organizations. We've had organizations and business have faced a sort of frenetic couple of years, few years, forever. Change is constant, and we've all heard that refrain of you say things are going to change, but isn't it always thus? Now, do you have any thoughts on how good leaders can balance continuity and change, sort of stability and innovation? Just to give a case in point, I was reading the interview yesterday with the chief executive of BP and Bernard Looney, who felt that he'd got the change message, he'd over-egged the change message a bit too much early on in his tenure around BP shifting to fewer hydrocarbons, more net neutrality when it comes to carbon emissions. Of course, it's an oil producer, so it's got a particular set of challenges. But he'd felt that he'd kind of overdone the change message over continuity, and the business and the financial markets anyway had suffered as a result. That's a dilemma that's faced by every leader and manager. Do you have some thoughts, Heather, on how managers can best balance that need to change with the need to provide security and stability to an organisation?
So as you were talking, the word that came up in my head was innovation.
Yeah.
Right. Innovation is really key amongst all of that, and that's how you proposition it. And transformation, which actually both have an element of change in it. But when you use the word change by itself, people always equate that to, am I going to lose my job?
Yes.
Right. They don't hear the same message. When you talk about we're innovating our business, you automatically hear investment in the business. And so you want to be part of that. So it's all about the language that we use, that we try to take, empower our people so they understand everyone is going through change right now and transformation. As a result of the 2-year pandemic, businesses are not going to look the same as how they looked 2 or 3 years ago. They're going to certainly feel different. People are going to be working in a different way. And it doesn't always necessarily mean people won't have their jobs. And the other thing I would say to people is use this as an opportunity to upskill yourself. Why are we still waiting for that tap on the shoulder from our line manager to tell us that we need to upskill ourselves or learn a new skill or make a new contact to help us in a way that we can become susceptible to whatever the future is going to hold for us? And what I would say is transformation for me is such an important word, because our businesses are being transformed and our people are being transformed at the same time. And that becomes really exciting if we look at it in a positive way. And even where we have had, people who have lost their jobs in some shape or form, and we mustn't forget that that's a tough time. What that also has done is given people the opportunity to start rethinking about, actually, what do I really want to do? How can I do that? Apart from my need to have an income, because you still have responsibilities, but also what can I do, so that I feel like I'm bringing my best self to whatever job it is that I'm doing. And that you need to have a sense of purpose in there. You need to feel excited. The innovation word needs to really go through that. And the golden thread for me of all of this is inclusivity.
Yeah.
Right. That needs to be threaded through all of this. And I think as leaders and businesses, we need to think about those core things under the umbrella of change. But I wouldn't use the word change. I would use those. I'd call them tomorrow's words, attracting tomorrow's future, and becoming innovative to businesses of the future.
What's really interesting listening to you talk, Heather, is when we're talking about, you can get these really sort of impersonal, technical sounding words like strategy and so on and so forth, but you keep on bringing it back to communication and culture and relationships and people. And we've got a question from Anita who touches on this. She said, look, on the subject of transformation, what do you think are the most important things to consider when trying to transform the culture of an organization?
That's another good question, because that's something that quite often people forget when they're having talks about, we need to be more diverse. Actually, what we need to do is look at what does our culture look like and feel like at the moment. And I think the starting point that we always need to know is, what does our culture really feel like? What is it really like? Not what does a piece of paper tell us it's like. What does it really feel like? And what I think is quite powerful is when you see leaders go down into the business and ask their ordinary employees, how does it feel to work here?
Yeah.
Right. They show, one, to their colleagues that this is really important to us. Two, they're going to listen to the answers. And leaders that really want to transform their business and get the best out of their people will come away with 2 or 3 actions and bring those actions back to that group of people by saying, you've told us that you need this, and this is what we're going to do. And that, I think, is, I said to you a little while ago that communication is really quite key. That piece is absolutely fundamental to when we're trying to change a culture of an organization. We need to understand how people feel working there right now and how they want to feel, and what is the difference about that feeling. And actually, you could have captured a lot of that during lockdown.
Yeah.
Because people left organizations who just thought, I don't need to go back there anymore.
Yeah. It was an incredible stress test on every organization and business, wasn't it? Now, we're starting to come to the end of our conversation, unbelievably. I'm sure we could carry on for quite some time. So I'm going to just ask you some quick fire questions that you just sort of strike back with whatever you think is. But we're gonna sort of pull out a bit. So, what would a better, fairer society look like to you, and what are you doing to make it happen?
So that thing for me is everybody, when they walk through their office every Monday morning, feel like they're part of their office.
Yeah. And
that's really quite key. And for me, that agenda means putting inclusion on the agenda of all leaders in the same way. If they're going to grow a new market, new products in a new market, they have a focus on it for a certain amount of time until they've achieved what they want to achieve.
And what are you doing to make it happen?
Keep that conversation going.
Yeah.
Make people accountable.
And what would you say best summarizes the impact that managers have on an everyday basis?
Actually, people's livelihoods. And that has an impact on how people feel and their mental health. A good leader creates great people, both in their personal life and in their work life. We can see bad leaders actually create this division in society, in the sense whether you work or you don't work, and how you feel as a result of the organisation you've worked for from that one bad experience you've had.
And one piece of advice for the government.
Try and build a more inclusive leadership table with people who can speak up, for people you'll listen to, and most importantly, people who are respected.
Brilliant advice. Heather, thank you so much for spending an hour with us this afternoon. I've learned an incredible amount. You give me a lot of food for thought personally, and I'm sure everybody watching it will feel exactly the same way. So thank you so much for your time, your thoughts, and for sharing your experience and expertise with us. Really very much appreciated.
Thank you for your time, and also well done on your first week with being part of the CMI family.
Thank you so much. I was keeping that secret, but for those who are watching, it is actually, I'm just into my second week at CMI and I'm loving every minute of it. And if you're not a member yet of the CMI community, I hope you find today inspiring and encourage you to click on the link in the chat to find out more. You can become part of that community.
And
you'd be very welcome.
Don't forget to mention our 75-year celebration.
We're in our 75th year, and there's loads going on. And actually, a lot of things we touched on today, equity, diversity, and inclusion are right at the heart of the work that we're doing to celebrate our 75th, but also to look forward way beyond that. And this has been a very forward-looking conversation. Heather, thank you so much. Enjoy your afternoon. And thank you for everybody who's been watching.